In Game 17 of 1951 World Championship match, the challenger David Bronstein demonstrated the miraculous power of prophylaxis. With a series of deep prophylactic moves, he prevented the world champion Mikhail Botvinnik from any chances for active play, and seized the initiative by advancing his pawns on the kingside. Then he placed all his pieces on the best squares behind the pawns, after which everything was ready for the deadly pawn breakthrough. Botvinnik started with d4 and Bronstein played the Nc3 Indian defense, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, b6, knight e2. Botvinnik is playing the Rubinstein variation, defending the knight on c3 and preparing a3, after which, if black captures on c3, white, of course, doesn't capture with a pawn, but with a knight, and the pawn structure would remain intact. That's the main idea of the Rubinstein variation. In game 13, in which this position already arose, Bronstein played bishop b7 and got a bad position. And especially for this game, he prepared a novelty. Bishop a6, much more active, immediately attacking the pawn on c4, as by playing knight e2, white blocked the bishop's diagonal, and the bishop isn't currently guarding the pawn on c4. Botvinnik made a natural-looking move, a3, in accordance with the main idea of the Rubinstein variation. However, later it was found that knight g3 is stronger. a3. Now black has an option, either to capture on c3, but after this white would simply capture with a knight, opening the bishop's diagonal, defending the pawn, and getting the advantage of two bishops. That's why Bronstein decided to spend a tempo and retreat, bishop e7. Black is going to play d5 next move, exerting more pressure on c4. For this reason, it would have been stronger for white to play knight f4, taking under stronger control the crucial d5 square. Instead of this, however, Botvinnik played knight g3, and after this, white doesn't have any opening advantage whatsoever, and black gets a very comfortable play. d5. C takes d, bishop takes f1. Now if white captures with the king or the rook, of course white would lose the right to castle, that's why knight takes f1. E takes d, knight g3. White is threatening to jump on f5, which would be unpleasant, attacking the bishop and the pawn. And now Bronstein starts a series of very strong, sophisticated prophylactic moves. First move is simple, queen d7, taking under control f5 square. Botvinnik played queen f3, renewing the threat, taking again under control the f5 square. However, the queen on d1 was defending the pawn on d4, and on f3 it isn't defending the pawn. And the most natural plan for white in this position is to play e4, because both knights control e4 square, the queen on f3 is attacking, exerting pressure on the weakened diagonal, and after e4 the bishop's diagonal would open. Bishop would be able to be activated because at the moment it's limited by its own pawns on dark squares. So the most natural plan for white is e4, and that's exactly what white would have done if black played g6 in order to prevent knight f5. White would play e4 with a good game. That's why Bronstein this time makes again a prophylactic move, but much more sophisticated one. Knight c6, and it turns out that e4 is impossible because d4 would fall. The knight is attacking the pawn on d4, and knight f5 isn't so dangerous because the bishop would simply retreat on f8, defending the pawn, and with his next move black would simply push away the knight by playing g6. That's why after knight c6 Botvinnik simply castled. And now g6, so black has prevented everything. Black prevented knight f5 and e4. So white doesn't have any active play now. And Botvinnik makes another passive move, bishop d2. Instead of this, Bronstein in his annotations suggests more active b4, grabbing space on the queen side, developing the bishop on b2, placing the rook on d1 in order to defend the pawn on d4, after which e4 might be possible. But Botvinnik plays passive bishop d2 in order to exert pressure on the open c-file. But it wouldn't be effective, as the game will show. Bronstein simply castles kingside, knight e2 in order to open the c-file for the rooks and reroute the knight on the active square on f4. And now Bronstein, with his next active move, seizes the initiative. You can pause the video and try to find it. He plays h5 in order to push away the knight from g3 after h4, because the knight is defending e4 square, and after that, after pushing away this knight, f6 knight would be greatly placed on the central square e4. Rook c1 in order to vacate the square for the knight and exerting pressure on the c file. h4, knight f1, knight e4. So black has seized the initiative as the black piece has crossed the center of the board. Knight f4, another strong prophylactic move by Bronstein. a5, preventing b4. Rook c2, Botvinnik is threatening to double on c file, exerting very strong pressure, attacking the knight, and if the knight retreats, c7 would fall. But another strong prophylactic move. Bishop d8, defending c7 and vacating e7 square for the knight, and the knight would be rerouted to the king side. Bishop e1, again a strange move. Grandmaster Sveshnikov, who also annotated this game, instead of bishop e1, suggests rook c1, exerting pressure, attacking the knight, and after knight retreats, probably b4 would be possible. But Botvinnik played bishop e1, probably to avoid the exchange of the knight for the bishop. However, Bronstein wouldn't have exchanged, most probably, his great knight for the bad bishop on d2. So bishop e1. After this, white's position is very passive. Knight e7. The knight is rerouted to the king side. Queen e2, vacating f3 square for the pawn in order to push away this knight because it's very active. Knight d6. The knight isn't waiting for f3 and in advance retreats. f3 and g5, pushing away the active knight and grabbing more space on the king side and vacating g6 square for the knight. Knight d3, queen e6, taking under full control e4 square, preventing white from playing e4. a4, knight g6, h3, f5. So the pawn storm has started. And now we can see black's idea. Black is going to prepare the breakthrough, pawn breakthrough, f4, after, of course, exerting pressure, more pressure on the e-file, and after playing f4, and after the disappearance of e3 pawn, the e-file would open, and d4 pawn would be weak. Probably that's why Botvinnik played bishop c3, in order to defend the pawn on d4 in advance. However, this move is a serious mistake, because when before the bishop moved to c3, the rook was attacking c7, and the bishop on d8 couldn't move because c7 would fall. But after bishop c3, the rook's file is blocked and the bishop can move. And after bishop moves, the rook can also be rerouted to the best square, to e8, exerting pressure on e-file. So Bronstein got a chance after this mistake to successfully regroup his pieces. Bishop f6. Bishop is great on f6 because after f4, d4 would be weak, and the bishop is already attacking the weakness on d4. Rook e1, rook e8. Now black pieces are ideally placed. Queen d1, except this rook, and Bronstein moves it to the e-file, of course. Rook f7, b3, rook e7. Now the pressure on the e-file, on the backward pawn on e3, is just intolerable. Bishop b2, and after all preparations are over, black pieces are ideally placed, very actively. Now, finally, f4, the breakthrough, and it turns out that white cannot capture on f4 because of simple queen takes e1, knight takes, rook takes, queen moves, knight takes, and it turns out that for the queen, black has a rook and a knight, and also a great active position. Everything is under attack. d4 is under attack, the knight is pinned, knight g3 is threatened, after which f3 would fall. White pieces are very bad. The knight is pinned, the bishop is bad, isn't doing anything. The rook must defend the second rank, and the queen alone isn't doing anything. And black would simply create deadly threats. That's why, of course, after f4, white didn't capture on f4 and played knight e5. Now, if Bronstein captured on e5 with a knight, that would be a mistake, because Bronstein gives this variation: d takes e, bishop takes e5, e takes f. The bishop would be pinned, and bishop d4 check, which at first sight is winning the exchange as e1 rook falls, doesn't work because of simple queen takes d4, sacrificing the exchange. And after queen takes e1, white has a deadly attack. The battery, queen and bishop battery, is very strong. Bronstein gives this variation, after which white is winning. That's why after knight e5, of course, Bronstein didn't capture with a knight, but with a bishop. Bishop takes e5. D takes e, and now, of course, he doesn't capture on e5 with a knight, because this knight must stay on g6, and as soon as white captures on f4, the knight would be greatly placed on f4. And e5 would be captured by the second knight, knight f7. e5 is doomed anyways. It's weak and black. All black pieces are attacking e5. E takes f. Bronstein, in his annotations, calls this move a mistake. Instead of this, he suggests knight h2. But Botvinnik captured on f4. And now the knight is greatly placed on f4. Botvinnik was again in a serious time trouble, and therefore he carried out a wrong knight maneuver now. His idea was, he played knight h2 in order to reroute the knight to g4 and then f6 check and probably win the exchange. However, this plan proved to be a deadly mistake and a blunder. Bronstein ignores the threat, plays c5, knight g4, d4, closing the bishop's diagonal, creating very strong passed pawn, and e5 would fall now anyways, as the bishop isn't defending it. And Botvinnik played knight f6 check, at first sight winning the exchange. However, this move is a terrible blunder, and after Bronstein's next move, Botvinnik resigned. Simple queen takes f6, and it turns out that if white captures, of course, black would capture on e1, white would lose a queen, and black would simply be a piece up. That's why after queen takes f6, Botvinnik resigned. Hit the like button, as it's really helpful for the channel growth, and see you in the analysis of game 18.